澳洲现任的总理那么在宣布今年稍晚要访问中国，但你却选择访问台湾，为什么？
Well, no longer being Prime Minister affords me the opportunity to visit Taiwan, and so I was very pleased to receive the invitation. And I wish Prime Minister Albanese all the best with his visit to Beijing. I think it's good that the countries are talking. It was never my government that wanted to stop talking, but also we were not going to have preconditions on those talks, and in fact, having talks when they were still imposing illegal trade sanctions was not something that was acceptable. So I'm pleased they're talking. But equally, I think it's incredibly important that I come here at a similar time on your National Day and be here to celebrate with you, to acknowledge the relationship that exists between Australia and Taiwan, and to stand with Taiwan for the cause of peace and freedom that you represent in this region. It is a beacon. It is not unlike when you think back to the times of West Berlin. And Taiwan holds up, I think, this hope. And those who are not living under that type of a regime not far from here, I hope they see that there is another way and will in time appreciate. We saw what happened in Hong Kong, and that was heartbreaking. Heartbreaking. People who had grown up in a relatively peaceful and free and democratic society, and to have all of that just stripped away. And it is just so important that Taiwan continue to be able to live peacefully and freely in a representative democracy where you decide.
据说你要来台湾这件事，中国有威胁你，他怎么威胁？
Well, I received a letter from the Chinese ambassador in Canberra suggesting I should not come. And I reminded him that Australians decide where we go, and we don't take those instructions from elsewhere. And the fact that I can come here to Taipei, I hope is something that is something that Australians can do for a very, very long time to come. See, I think, understand that that's really what's at stake. Those simple liberties, I said this to the President today, that in Taiwan and in places like Israel and others like that where they live under constant threat, democracy and the freedoms of economic freedom and religious freedom and political freedom, these are so more valued because their perishability is very clear if it's not tended to. And so I think Australians and those elsewhere in the world can learn a lot from Taiwan and the way that you value these things, as I saw on display today. So it was a wonderful thing to be able to be here and just participate.
They are angry now.
And so whether they will have the capability to do it or not, who's to say, and how quickly. But as we've seen in Ukraine, what looks good on paper doesn't necessarily end up well in practice. An illegal invasion that was believed would have taken Ukraine within 5 days, and the war goes on now. Well, we're coming up. We're well past 18 months now. So these things don't always play out the way the aggressors think. And so it's the job of those who want to resist that and ensure peace that we spoil the calculus as best we can. But that is never done through weakness. That is never done through appeasement. I mean, these are the lessons of history. They are the lessons of history, and we must learn them. And I believe Taiwan knows those lessons only too well. Australia, I believe, similarly, and so we must continue to work together to that end. I also don't believe China wishes to take Taiwan by force. I don't believe that's their intention either, or their wish. That said, we also have to be careful that submission is not achieved by other, what I'd describe as unpeaceful means, through coercion, through creating a spectre of inevitability, or seeking to drain the resilience of Taiwan and its partners and supporters. That is not a peaceful outcome either. So we can't allow the goalposts to be shifted on what is peaceful outcomes here. The status quo needs to be maintained. The status quo is a situation where the people of Taiwan know freedom. That is the status quo. That's why we support the status quo. And I would hate to see happen in Taiwan what has happened in Hong Kong. Very different circumstances. I'm not pretending they're the same. But for those who grew up in freedom in Hong Kong and don't know it now, I suppose that's of little comfort to them that their circumstances were different.
听过更早中国要打台湾，那个年份是什么时候？
Well, it's more theorising, those who've sort of speculated that. It's quite odd that a possible aggressor would actually tell you what day they'll be ready, and it would be actually that day. So, I think that goes with the nature of these things. I have no doubt, I mean, the PRC have been very clear about wanting to establish that capability to be able to do this. But that doesn't mean they'll use it. Doesn't mean they'll use it at all. The implications of that occurring would be catastrophic at so many levels. Just for starters, you'd be looking at a Great Depression to rival that of the 1930s. The way that Taiwan is just sitting at the centre of the modern economy with technology and the complete disruption of that. I mean, we saw it in a very small way in COVID. I mean, the time waited to get new vehicles because of the absence of a chip. The rest of them are built. They're just waiting on the chip. And that blows out from, a month to 12 months. Imagine the catastrophe that would come from a conflict of that nature, let alone the human cost, and then what might follow. Now, that doesn't play out well for China either. And so it's very difficult to see winners in that scenario. So this is the calculus. So we keep working the calculus.
中国如果攻打台湾，会产生什么样的后果？
Well, I've largely, I think, just set those out, but the economic impacts would be disastrous, followed through by the absolutely horrific human consequences on both sides. And, the risk of escalation of a conflict like that when you've got two nuclear powers is significant. I think the sheer scale of that all provides a disincentive for everybody. And this is why I think what's happening, the situation in Taiwan and the risk of aggression there or conflict can't really be compared to Ukraine or the Middle East for that matter. The stakes globally for peace and security in the Indo-Pacific and in the Taiwan Straits in particular are next level and a level beyond that. So I think it's important, for people who living in Taiwan to understand that I think outside of here, people understand that in the region, particularly countries like Australia understand that. I have no doubt Japan does, and the United States. That is understood. Taiwan and its peace and security are inextricably linked to global peace and security.
In Taiwan, some people are skeptical about the United States believing that Taiwan is a U.S. pound. Others argue that dialogue with China can preserve the peace. What is your view on maintaining peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait?
Well, talk on its own will not achieve peace. It's good to have talk, but it has to be done in the context of a credible deterrence, and that talk comes from a position of strength. And Taiwan is nobody's pawn, just as Australia is nobody's pawn. I think one of the challenges that we had in Australia is that we were often criticised by China for simply being an adherent to US foreign policy. Was just simply not true. We've been in the region a long time. We have our own lens and perspective on issues in the Indo-Pacific. And I thought it was disappointing that China failed to appreciate that and the nuance and the difference.
The Russia-Ukraine war has been going on for over 1 year and 8 months. How will it end? Who will win? And what are the implications of the war for Taiwan as well as China?
Well, I don't know, and I don't think anybody does. And the illegal invasion of Ukraine had to be met with resistance, and the courage of the people of Ukraine is something extraordinary, something extraordinary, and they deserve our praise. They will keep fighting, and they will keep resisting, and we must keep supporting them. I think that is one of the lessons, whether it's Ukraine or whether it's Taiwan or whether it's Israel, I suppose, for that matter. You keep supporting those whose liberty is sought to be taken from them. And so that's a lesson, more broadly for the West. In Taiwan, the lesson I think we have to be careful about, because I said before, I think the circumstances and the stakes of the geopolitics here are very, very different. And so there's a lot more at stake here at a global level, at least, in Taiwan, and I think that will change how the protagonists behave. For example, Ukraine was not a member of NATO, so the idea that there would be some sort of direct engagement of NATO powers in resisting that invasion was not present. Plenty of supporters come, but the direct role's a different issue. Such calculations cannot be made about Taiwan. I think President Biden's statements around this issue are probably the most firm of any president ever on this topic. And that has caused some controversy in the United States, but I commend him for it, for leaning into it. And whatever Australia's position might be in those circumstances, well, I think would similarly be known at the time. But there's no doubt in my mind that Australians would feel absolutely appalled at any aggression towards Taiwan. Yeah. Well, I'd add a couple of points to that. The other is that the direct invasion scenario is probably not the most likely. Blockades are probably more likely. Cyber attacks are probably more likely than direct military invasion. The other lesson, I think, for Taiwan specifically is you do not want to find yourself in Ukraine's position where you're trying to get fighter jets and you're trying to get missiles and you're trying to get anti-aircraft guns. You want to be the prickliest porcupine you can be.
Porcupine.
When it comes to having that effective deterrent. Again, it's about the calculus, and Taiwan has the most at stake, and therefore Taiwan's preparedness, I think, would only add to the preparedness of other countries to come to its aid.